All right, so it's the 6th episode of Star Trek Voyager. Did you expect that we would already see an Alpha Quadrant species?
Didn't necessarily surprise me. It's a little disappointing because already they haven't figured out how to tell stories without going back to the old well of the Alpha Quadrant. That said, this particular story is more about this little moment of hope that, we could, even as they said last week, we're starting to settle in. We're starting to realize, actually, this is 75 years. They are getting their hopes up. They are, realizing, okay, maybe 6 weeks, but 8 weeks, and then we got home. It was fine. It was this weird 2-month period in the Delta Quadrant.
It's weird to me because watching Star Trek Voyager this time, I'm really struck by the fact that the characters almost know that they're in a Star Trek show. Because what I mean by that is, if this was an episode of TNG, they would have been home by now.
Yeah.
So that's how usually things work in Star Trek. And so I mean, what I mean by that is I don't know if the writers have really internalized yet what it actually means for the show, because they've come up with this setting. They've come up with this idea that the Star Trek, the Starship Voyager is 75 years from home. And yet they keep going back to the well of, maybe this is a way for us to get home. Maybe this is a way for us to get home. Yeah. And I don't know that that's the best use of their time.
It's essentially Gilligan's Island then, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Alpha Quadrant has had a few series to build itself up. Again, the Protos world building and the original series. The world building through recurrence and just accretion in Next Generation, and the more deliberate stuff done in Deep Space Nine. But I don't know what the Delta Quadrant is.
Right.
Even the Gamma Quadrant. While we don't have as much of an idea of what that is, we know what the Dominion is. We know what its governing structure is. All of that, because they were interested in the Gamma Quadrant a bit as a setting, and it doesn't seem like they're interested in the Delta Quadrant as a setting. They haven't figured out what it is, what isn't. These Kazon, for example, are they the equivalent of Klingons? Are they it would be a perfect time. We're 7 episodes in. Why haven't we seen them again if they're supposed to be this thing?
Right. Yeah, I think so. I mean, we will see the Kazon again, I think, fairly soon. But it is the kind of thing where, Eye of the Needle is, I like the idea for the episode, and I'm not saying that I'm necessarily criticizing this episode in particular, because I think if this type of story is the type of story they want to tell, it's done very well, and there's a lot of things in the episode that I like. I sort of agree with you, though, that we've only seen, I think, 5 species so far.
Yeah.
That are native to the Delta Quadrant. We've seen Neelix's species, Kessa's species, the Kazon, the Vidians, and the whatever the ones next episode are. I don't think I'm forgetting any.
The creature from the cloud, if you want to count things like that.
But that's kind of just a standard Star Trek thing. That's like the jellyfish from Encounter at Farpoint. But it is the kind of thing where it's... for such a high concept show that Voyager is, a high concept in the setting, I don't know that they're not, I know that they're not super interested in ultimately establishing or world building this. And I guess it's more a case of stay tuned and see where it goes.
Sure.
But at least in these early episodes, I'm wondering how you feel about that, because do you feel like this show has an identity or an idea of what it's doing yet?
I don't think it does. I mean, again, I'm thinking about how the first few times we saw Gamma Quadrant aliens, they were all kind of dicks, remember? And we all kind of got I was saying, so that's we could see certain traits in common in the Gamma Quadrant. We could get certain feels about what it was like to be in there, and that was very interesting about it. This was a entirely new part of the galaxy that nobody had ever been. This is the Federation. They are extraordinarily curious about who lives there and what kind of place it is. And while I can appreciate all we want to do is get home, and we have to really worry about our ship and what's going on with that, and do we have enough dilithium to get home, or whatever technobabble word they want to use that week, yes, they have to be worrying about some of the more gritty details about just getting home and surviving, but it doesn't seem like they're very interested in what's around them.
Well, they do and they don't, though,
yeah.
right? Because,
well, we're told every few minutes, oh, we're scanning everything. Oh, we're still doing our exploration, but...
I mean, at least Neelix seems to think. I mean, Neelix is not in this episode, but we have seen Neelix say before, like, you know, these people want to get home, but they keep stopping and scanning asteroids and going into nebulas and all kinds of crazy shit. Why don't we just plot a straight course for home? And, you know, also the weird thing is that I don't really understand why Neelix and Kes want to go back to the Federation. There's a lot of, you know, it's one of those things where I think that I'm talking about this more in terms of Voyager because I know where Voyager goes. I mean, Deep Space Nine also had some of these problems in the beginning, and I don't want to discount that.
I am going through the last DS9 I saw was What You Leave Behind, and that was a masterpiece of taking the guns, firing the guns that have been from the first episode. And so I do have that very good feeling about it. It's true.
Yeah, and I think partly it's just hard to go back to a show that doesn't know what its identity is yet and really grapple with that. But aside from that, I think that Eye of the Needle does a pretty good job of establishing that these people are starting to get really homesick.
Yeah.
We've already seen that a little bit, obviously, and I think that it's an interesting choice for the show to, you know, they've done a pretty good job of, I think, establishing the characters, at least in the early days. We know at least somewhat about what these people are like, what their beliefs are, what their different personalities are. And aside from Harry Kim, who, I don't know, he likes to sleep with a mask on. But
he's just basically an incontinent little puppy, and you can't hate him. But, you know, you don't always want him around. But, you know, he's Harry.
He's incontinent?
No, it's a metaphor.
Oh, okay. Because I was about to say, did I miss something? Now they're getting to the point where it's starting to set in that they are 75 years from home.
Yeah.
They have no real way of getting back quickly. And and then suddenly they find this wormhole and they're latching on to anything that could get them home. I don't think they're wrong to do that. Again, They're in the Star Trek universe. These problems are usually solved in 45 minutes. I just don't know, again, if the writers and the creators of Star Trek Voyager, the way in which Star Trek has traditionally told its stories and the writers that moved over to Star Trek Voyager specifically, I don't think had a lot of training or experience in this sort of serialized long form storytelling, and I don't know that they're interested in it, and I think that it's showing.
Yeah, the worst that they had in TNG was, we are at home at the end of this first episode, but then in the season premiere next season, we'll figure out how to get him back, and the end. And maybe later on we'll mention, that was a weird day we had, but that's about it. Yeah, that's about it.
Because I think that, again, I'm not very interested in keeping things back from you about Star Trek Voyager. I mean, like, for example, last week I told you Kes leaves. It doesn't really matter that much. That part of what I think is kind of paradoxically, I think, what's frustrating to me about these early episodes, and I don't know if it's frustrating to you, but they are not ignoring the meta plot, right? They're not ignoring, they're ignoring some of it about the Maquis and things like that, but in terms of, here is a lone Starfleet ship that is trying to get home, every single episode that we've watched so far, except for maybe Phage, has had some part of that. And I feel like Star Trek Voyager gets a lot better and a lot more satisfying of a show in a couple of seasons when they basically ignore that.
Okay. When they're just on their route and discovering weird shit. It hasn't bothered me necessarily, but again, to know that it's just aimless wandering from here on out, essentially, until the series finale. And again, if I thought that the pilot seemed to set up this arc about we have to find the second caretaker, and again, that show would be interesting to have every so often. They check in with a plot point to find another place to go. It turns out to be a false lead, and there's an adventure, whatever. But if they cared about that, if they cared about progressing the journey, it would be something. But I get the sense that their physical position in space is irrelevant. They can pretty much see the same things later on that they could see early on, except more self-assured from the writer's end.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Like, it doesn't really matter how far from home they are. They are just essentially a ways. We're far from home and we have to get home, right? It's not like there's a map that they're. I guess I'm explaining this poorly. They don't progress on their journey until it's time for the series to be over, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So,
yes and no. They do and they don't. And I kind of feel like one of the interesting choices that the show could have made would be to say, okay, it's going to take them 75 years to get home. So what does it matter if it takes them 85 or 95? If they keep taking these detours and they're saying, okay, well, you know what? It's going to take us a really long time to get back. Because really what it comes down to for me is this episode is a perfect example of, they're not going to necessarily find a quicker way to get home if they set a straight course for home or they just aimlessly wander, like you said.
Yeah.
The chances that they're going to encounter something to get them home faster are probably equally as likely no matter what course they take. And they already know it's going to take them 75 years to get back. So most of the crew is going to be dead at that point. So to me, it's like, well, why not try and have a satisfying life then if it's going to take you that long to get home? Of course, they could just set a straight course, and then if they have detours and stuff, that's fine if they find something interesting. Because there should have been, I think...
This is your life philosophy, apparently. Like, this seems like a worldview thing almost.
Well, because to me, it's like, okay, if it's going to take you 75 years to get back to where you feel comfortable, to get back to your home, you're not going to survive that long. So...
And even if you do, your home is going to be irrevocably changed. It's
right. So why not? Set a straight course for home, but have a conversation about it and say, okay, we're setting a straight course for home, but if we find interesting things, if we want to go to the gambling planet for a month because we're bored, we're going to do that. Because if it was going to take them 20 years to get home, that would be different. But 75 is such a long time that, again, it doesn't necessarily matter if it takes them 75 or 80 or 85 or 90 or 100 because they're all going to be dead.
This is a universe in which a beam from a creature did push them to the other end of the galaxy. There are wormholes. There could be something, and that could be in any direction. Any of these planets could be that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's engage with the episode then, because I do like this episode. I think it's well done, and it's also a good example of the show, I think, to some degree, committing to the emotional reality of the situation, if not the actual reality of the situation.
Well, there is something that in a lot of these episodes, a character's life is in danger, right? And you're going to say, well, they're not going to kill them off at this point. I was in no worry that Neelix, for example, would not figure out a way to get along at the end of that episode. We know they're not going to completely make that kind of a change so early on in the thing. They're not going to kill off somebody in episode 5. Okay. So in this way, this episode gave kind of the opposite feeling of that, as in we know they're not going to get back to the Alpha Quadrant in this episode, and a message probably will not get out. And so there is that element of how is it going to happen, and that it does turn out to be. It's a very futile and frankly a very bleak episode in a lot of ways.
I think so, and I like that starkness too.
Yeah,
I think that the point of the episode is not the plot. The point is, what does this glimmer of hope do to these people? And I think that they seem the most alive that they've seemed. I think that they're very excited.
Yeah, at the beginning when she's going into the wormhole, she's delighted. We've talked about Janeway as the scientist. She's totally geeking out over this thing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I like about Janeway is that almost each episode gives her a chance to say, I think what we're seeing here is a Technobabble X. And I like that. I like that she is someone who is both engaged with the science and knows a lot about it and is able to theorize. She has even in these early episodes, I think that we see that Janeway has a very interesting mind, especially in the way that it works.
I think related to that is the conversation that she has with Kes when she's saying, the doctor, he's a hologram, he's programmed, which is the complete opposite of what we have viewed about Data in Next Generation, that Janeway comes from this position. Now, Kes is very easily able to kind of talk her out of that worldview because she is a captain on a Star Trek show, sure, but the fact that she comes to it from the scientific view, just thinking about the programming of the Doctor, is very unusual, I would say. That's very striking. Yeah. Again, that's something that Picard very naturally came to the conclusion, well, just because we're made of flesh and blood, we're no less machines than Data is, and just because he's made of positronics doesn't, that kind of a thing.
Well, I this is a good opportunity to talk about the Doctor because I find that they're doing something really interesting with his character.
I think he's one of my favorite characters so far.
Yeah, and so the Doctor very quickly got established as a comic relief character, and now they are definitely pivoting away from that. He is not comic relief anymore. And what I find interesting about the Doctor so far is, you bring up Data, which I think is a good analogy to this character, because he is an artificial life form. He is not quote unquote real, but no one is dealing with the Doctor on that level except for Cass.
Yeah,
and Janeway's reaction to that conversation that Cass has with her, where she comes to her and she says, look, if you had a crew member who was being talked to badly, who was being ignored, who felt like his needs were not being met, what would you do? And of course, Janeway says, well, I would be horrified and I would want to help. And then Cass says, well, look, the Doctor is like that. And Janeway is scoffing at her. And I think that part of the reason for that is, of course, that the Doctor is a hologram. And what experience do Star Trek characters have with holograms?
Yeah, it's recreation.
With the dumb as rocks ones that are in the holodeck, right? Like, no one seems to really believe that any of the people in that bar in Marseille are real people. They are definitely done well enough that you can have a bit of fun with them. But if you ask them a question that is outside the parameters of their program, they're not really going to have an answer. Whereas the Doctor has been apparently programmed and designed to be able to learn, to be able to experience, make judgments. I think that actually in the next episode, one of the failings of that episode, I think, was that they did not talk, because there's another little beat in there about Cass talking to the Doctor at the very beginning of the episode about, why do you think you're not a real person yet? And the Doctor says, well, I'm just, I'm able to make judgments because I was programmed to. And, a key counterpoint to that, I think, would have been Cass saying, yeah, but you came up with this radical new theory to save Neelix's life 2 weeks ago when, you created a holographic lung. Were you programmed with that knowledge?
That's a bit more than just simply accessing programs. She does go with this regular Star Trek. Again, I'm dealing with memories. How is that different from files? And again, a machine, flesh and blood, is the same basic thing. I like that he is. In fact, I would say initially having him be the comic character adds a little twist to it, because again, he's just a hologram, and now that he's actually feeling something, it's a bit I don't know, you feel almost a little bit guilty that in the first episode when his imager is being messed up, that that kind of thing.
Yeah, but if you think back to all of the comic relief that the Doctor had in the first few episodes of the series, it was all surrounding either people being a dick to him or people ignoring him. And now that has been explicitly called out, at least on Janeway's part, I think that you see that the Doctor is becoming more of a I don't mean to say this as a pun, but a three-dimensional character.
Yeah. And Janeway does come out of that attitude quickly, and she's giving him the ability to activate, deactivate his program, but more importantly, the fact that she's simply asking him anything that he would like, and saying, you're a member of my crew. I mean, that empowers him at the end. He does feel... I mean, there is a very... With her, she almost comes off as somebody who thinks of themselves as very liberal, not really racist, and then you explain institutional racism and gerrymandering, for example, and... oh no, you're right. It's a little deeper than that, and I didn't, even recognize. She's again, if these are entertainment people, another example is kind of people not treating waiters and waitresses as quite human. She's recognizing that no, they are actually a person here.
They are.
They are.
Oh, that's why I tip them.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right.
I don't believe in tips because, I think they should be given a real wage. So I'm not tipping in order to foster that.
I think you're right. And I think that it's key to the Doctor's development so far, of course, that, he also wants to get a name. I mean, he says at the end of the episode he wants a name. Mm-hmm. So, that's interesting.
I do like that Janeway says, "Oh, I was just about to have a cup of soup as her snack," and then she orders vegetable bouillon. Not vegetable soup, but vegetable bouillon.
Yeah, it's basically like, why are you eating this?
Yeah, I know. It's not even that nourishing or anyway. Good for Janeway.
It's just something she grew up drinking in Indiana. That's what they do there.
I mean, if this is they've done a lot to characterize, the captains and everybody by their drink orders. Earl Grey tea hot says something very definite about Picard, or everybody ordering Ractaginos in DS9 says something very different. So then
because they all want really, really dark, strong coffee to make them as jittery as possible.
They're all stressed and overworked, and they just need something to keep them awake. Yeah, and
Janeway needs vegetable bouillon, I guess, to stave off scurvy. I don't know. I think that's a little strange, but I do wonder about some of the other characters in this episode specifically because again, we're doing this thing where we're not talking about the plot of the Voyager episode very much because
the plot was fine.
It's fine. It's well constructed. It moves along, but it's really about what it's doing to these people.
Yeah, and I wish the show were a bit more, because it does seem like it's trying to tread a line between. It wants to focus on the plot. It doesn't necessarily want to have a overarching character arcs and things like that. It's not really invested into characters with extreme backstories or anything like that yet. But at the same time, it is more interested in the characters, and it is more focused on the characters than it is on the mechanics of the plot. Again, this seems like one of those shows where they had just put, insert technobabble here and had an intern fill it in, right? Like,
that's what they did.
Yeah. So
I know
that
when they wrote a script, I think they used the word tech.
Yeah.
So they would say like tech the tech. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah. No, I know. So.
And then they would have the science guy come up with something that sounded vaguely plausible.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, it's, there's a ship and it's attacking us. We have some kind of problem. B'Elanna can figure it out. The active part of that is that B'Elanna's figured out how to counter something that's happened, and it is more invested in her and her rising to that occasion or whatever. That's what those beats are, I guess. Maybe, but it's still trying to. But there is a lot of technobabble for something they don't care about, I guess, is the point.
Yeah, and that is, we'll talk about that at some point. I think that Voyager does have a reputation for being the technobabble show, and that is true. And I don't really know why that is, but that's something for us to talk about later. I like that, it's interesting because I think the show is trying to do different pairings, of course. We see that in the next episode with Tuvok and Paris, who haven't really been in many scenes together before. And in this episode, you have B'Elanna and Harry working together.
Yeah.
And I like that pairing. I think that it's they have a nice dynamic because B'Elanna calls him Starfleet. She has a little nickname for him. They're doing little subtle things in the way that these people talk to each other that characterizes them more, I think, than actually having these long, in-depth conversations about their emotions. Because they have that little scene in engineering where Harry and B'Elanna are talking about their families.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me about that is Harry kind of doesn't have a personality because he's 22 and he's a parent's boy. And he's very focused on his, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. He's very focused on his family. You can see Harry Kim as a person who really, really did well in school, didn't have many friends, decided to go to Starfleet Academy because he is very, very intelligent, spent a lot of time with his parents. He has a very strong relationship with them, and now he is thrust across the galaxy, and he has no ability really to connect with people because he hasn't had to.
Well, he's never had really hardship. Again, if he's had no friends, he probably wasn't, bullied to the point of near suicide or anything like that. And
does that even happen in the Federation?
I don't. Well, it does in the 2009 Star Trek movie where you see young Spock being bullied. Anyway,
We'll talk about that in like 15 years, but yeah.
Yeah, Harry Kim had probably just had a bland upbringing. The only fact that, he is the only unusual thing about him is that he's not white. Otherwise, he is just your generic, all-American character. And yeah, that nickname of Starfleet in a way is kind of, she thinks he's a goody-good in a way.
Yeah.
But she does like him. She doesn't really like... I think she recognizes that his path in life was very different from hers, and he's not...
Yeah, she comes from a broken home, essentially.
Yeah, and
she's dealing with being half Klingon.
Yeah, but the thing is, he's capable of understanding where she's coming from. She does need to share her background, but he does get it. He does feel some compassion about that. He's... he's not being cocky about it. He doesn't think he's better than her in a way.
No. I think that Harry Kim is extremely insecure.
Yeah, well, because I think he recognizes that he's not equipped to deal with this situation, that he is not, independent. He's not as maybe grown up as some of the other people, and certainly between him and B'Elanna, she's the much cooler person. She's much more able to handle things. She may not necessarily think so. She may be talking about her rage and her temper and her lack of discipline and all of that, but in Harry Kim's eyes, she's the one who actually can be on her own.
Yeah. Well, and I guess the last thing to talk about would be the resolution of the episode. So obviously, of course, as you said before, they're not going to get home. You know that, and the point of this episode is not to get them home. The point of this episode is to put these characters in an emotional place. Yeah, and I think it does a good job of that. Now, did you find the twist at the end?
It was
surprising or interesting.
I mean, there were several cruel twists of the knife. Oh, he's from they can't travel through the wormhole. Oh, he's a Romulan and he's being folk. So finally he's going to pass on the message, but he's from the past. Okay, well, at least he can, but then he's died before.
Right.
It
now, the real question is, why does a random Starfleet starship have records on random dead Romulans?
I know.
It seems a little weird, but okay.
Yeah, it's how cruel can we make this? How many more twists of the knife can we have so that and
I also think that, it does, I don't want to see the show going down this well of, here's a way we can get home. Damn, it doesn't work too much. But at least early on in the show, I think it works because it establishes how difficult it will be to get them home.
And I guess there are some Kobayashi Maru elements here, right? Like, we know going into this episode that something is going to happen and the plan will not work and they will be no better off than they have been before. Just as, frankly, there have been a couple episodes where, the Cloud, for example, they end up wasting a lot more energy and they end up getting no actual ones. They know they have the moral victory, but...
Yeah.
If they are in a situation where they are not going to achieve their goals, where they may end up failing, where they may not, how are they facing that failure? And I mean, we see, I think it's very striking that, Janeway cries for a couple of moments and then she's just like, all right, well, we're going on. Again, this is a crew who has been kind of forced to be a little closer and more intimate with each other just based on their circumstances. So, I think that Janeway is able to express, all of the sides of, the tenderness and the toughness. She's, I think she's earned enough that doesn't come off as a cliche. She doesn't come off as over emotional or anything. She is allowed to grieve for this moment that there was a moment of hope she could have gotten her people through, and
in a very real way, Janeway is grieving for the entire crew.
Yeah,
she is the stand-in for the grief and the sadness of the entire crew.
She cries because the rest of her crew can't cry, kind of a thing.
Or we can't show them all crying because that would take 14 minutes.
Oh, it would be so. And just play this.
It was a very strange choice that the show made. All right, let's talk about Post Facto.
I liked this one a lot in terms of plot. I think that
it's fine.
It's maybe not the most revelatory episode, but Star Trek in general, I like it when it does a noir takeoff, and this was a very good noir takeoff. We had a Tuvok episode. We got to learn the tiniest of things of that.
The most exciting thing, we learned some information about Tuvok.
But what information did we learn beyond? He's married.
He's married. He's been married for 67 years, I think. He's a Vulcan that is like middle-aged.
Yeah.
So we know all that.
Yeah, I guess so. So I guess where I want to. I don't know if you had anything specific to say, but
I think that just in terms of Tuvok, I think that what I like about Tuvok is that they created a Vulcan character that is different from what we would expect.
Yeah.
Most Vulcans, most specifically Spock, of course, because he is the Vulcan that is the elephant in the room of all Vulcans.
And especially because he had the same position as he and Tuvok have the same position, right? Like
no.
They're not they're first officers? Oh, shit. Okay, this is showing how much I understand where everybody is on Voyager. So Chakotay is the first officer, Tuvok is security officer. Okay.
Yes. But that's what I'm saying is that I like the fact that Tuvok is not a science officer. He is a tactical guy. He is a detective. He is a security guy. And that makes sense because Vulcans would be really good at that too. So it's establishing the Vulcan, it's establishing Tuvok as a little bit different from other Vulcans that we've seen, and also that he is still very, very good at being a Vulcan. Yeah,
I mean, I'm comparing him to Spock. In this episode, I'm also comparing him to Odo a bunch. Again, they actually have the same position.
Yes.
And thinking of Odo's reasons.
No, Odo was the barber.
Anytime Odo was faced with a mystery, and especially in his days when he
what haircuts to give someone.
Exactly. What does the same, give me a haircut the way it's going to look like in 2 weeks mean exactly?
Humanoids.
When Odo became the constable in Terek Nor, in the Cardassian days, and had to very much wanted to cross, toe that lawful line between the Cardassians and the Bajorans. I mean, for Odo, his ruling concept was law, and for Tuvok, it's logic. They are very similar, but I think we're seeing this episode is a good way of seeing kind of the differences in those personalities and where that's going. Tuvok isn't as effusive as even Spock was, I would say. At least not so far.
That's right, because I think that one of the underappreciated things about Voyager, I think there are a lot of underappreciated things about Voyager, which we will get to over the 7 seasons of the show that we talk about, that I think Tim Russ does I like his performance very much. I think like I talked about in one of the patron specials a couple months ago, one of the things that always bothers me about the way Vulcans are portrayed by guest actors of the week is that they're portrayed as these emotionless robots and they're not very interesting performances. Tim Russ is really, really good at playing a Vulcan, and you're right. He's playing a more dispassionate Vulcan primarily because he's a Vulcan. He's not a half Vulcan, half human like Spock was. And so Spock had these conflicting, parts of his nature that were making him out to be a little bit less of a Vulcan than perhaps he would want to be. Whereas Tuvok has none of those problems.
I also think it's interesting that Tuvok doesn't seem to feel as out of place as Spock sometimes did. And maybe we will see more of this, but Spock did Spock was defined by feeling torn between human and Vulcan, but he also did feel very out of place on the human ship, and a way that you would think being full Vulcan would amplify that. Tuvok doesn't seem to be a concern for him.
Well, yeah, I think part of that is just the changing nature of Star Trek from the original series to Voyager. I mean, Spock was the only non-human crew member on the Enterprise, whereas Tuvok is not on Voyager.
I guess what I thought was very interesting is we see kind of a beginnings of at the end of this episode, Paris professes his friendship to Tuvok, and what I think was, I guess, noticing certain subtleties in, again, Tuvok is not a robot. He has very strong he does have, if he's a full-blooded Vulcan, he's going to have extraordinarily strong emotions that he is controlling. When Tom is saying, "Oh, you don't make many friends by reading," and Tuvok basically just says, "Well, yes." And I'm waiting for the but in there, and he doesn't even say anything. He just kind of concedes Tom's point. And the fact that he does that is about as effusive of a profession as an acceptance of that friendship as one could get from a Vulcan in a way.
Yeah.
I think it's very, and I think that kind of is I can see also his demeanor affecting Janeway in some ways. There are a lot of points in this episode where she is holding in certain her amusement a lot of times at things. She's very restrained about that, and I can see that as, working so closely with Tuvok that she picks up a couple things from him.
Yeah, I think that's right, because I mean, not to talk about Janeway too much. I mean, she's not too much of a part of this episode, but
which was the right decision.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I mean, she's been a big part of most of the episode so far. So let's get away from that a little bit and establish some of the other characters a little bit more. That she does have this. She has to be the captain. She has to be professional and be the stern leader and everything. But she's also someone who's really amused by shit.
Yeah,
and I like that. But anyway,
yeah, you get this again. You get the sense that she is stopping herself because if she fully gives into it, she's going to be cracking up for 10 minutes, and she just can't do that. So she does that little smirk, and I love it.
Yeah, and I think you're right that one of the things that has sort of been established so far. I mean, we saw it in Caretaker a bit. Is that it seems as though Tuvok and Janeway have worked together for a very long time. She relies on him very much. I think that there is an implicit level of trust there. And so Janeway has really no worries about Tuvok conducting this investigation because she has the experience and the knowledge of how he's going to perform his duties and how he's going to do. And that, he is, because Janeway keeps saying we're devoted to proving Paris's innocence.
Yeah.
Tuvok never says that.
No, he's devoted to the truth, whatever it happens to be. If he wants to find out the mystery, he wants to find if Paris is guilty, he wants to prove that Paris is guilty. I mean, this is somebody who a couple of weeks ago said, well, B'Elanna punched somebody, we're keeping her in the brig. That he doesn't really, the logic side of him, it's just he's more concerned about justice, I'd say.
Yeah, he's more concerned with justice, and he's more concerned with the truth, whatever it may be, frankly.
Which is an interesting wrinkle when you're considering that, again, this is a situation in which the rules may need to be bent at certain times. Do you really, with as few people on the ship as there are, and with as good a pilot as Tom Paris is, can we really afford to lose him for this? So, certainly.
Well, it does make you wonder that if Tuvok could not prove Paris's innocence, or if Tuvok's investigation did prove satisfactorily to Janeway and the rest of the crew of the Voyager that Paris did murder this guy.
Yeah. Or frankly,
what would they have done?
Or if the judge or magistrate or whatever said, well, it doesn't really matter, the sentence is, he turns out he is swayed by the argument at the end. He is devoted towards justice for the doctor who did commit this crime, but if he wasn't willing to be swayed.
Right, and what would that really, what would Janeway do in that instance? I mean, can they really not have? As you're right, can they really not have Paris?
Yeah,
doesn't seem like
it's very nice. It's very good that he does turn out to be innocent. He does turn out to be the person he says he is. He even as, and I mean, he again mentions his past as a prisoner in this episode. He is the kind of person whose background may lead one to think he is not the most trustworthy person, but...
And I think also it's interesting that part of what causes Paris to get put in this situation in the first place is the level of trust and acting in good faith of the Federation, because they just kind of go, yeah, okay, we'll send you guys down there and you can help them with the warp drive.
Harry Kim will stop him if anything bad goes wrong.
I mean, wasn't there like a bar Paris could have gone to instead?
Yeah, but she was just so beautiful.
I guess. I don't know. Well, that's the other part of the episode. I mean, obviously she is the femme fatale character.
You have to accept a bunch of things happening because that's the genre of it.
Right. But I think that it is the case where if you look at this episode too closely, you can start to poke some holes in it. I mean, I think the actual mystery is pretty well constructed.
No, it worked for that, and I liked how the the biggest clue that this writing is there. They hide the big clue in plain sight the entire time. As you know, I as Tom Paris says, I thought that was just part of it. Yeah, you're led to think that's just part of it.
Yeah,
I thought that was very well done.
I do like the fact that, for example, the memories are black and white because it's a film noir.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it doesn't really make any sense, but why not? I mean, that's fine.
And they're also kind of poorly acted, too, especially from the wife's part. No, Tom, stop! You know,
that's a nice little subtle choice. I picked up on that.
Yeah, I liked it. Again, I think Star Trek does good noir episodes, and this was a good noir episode.
Well, so this was directed by LeVar Burton.
Okay.
And I think he directed a few other episodes of the show as well. And that was kind of interesting to me because I didn't notice that. I don't generally, I'm paying too much attention to what's going on screen to notice the credits a lot of the time. But I read about the episodes later usually, and that was interesting to me because I did notice in that opening scene with the Doctor and Cass where they were talking in his office about, is he a real person? What's going on? Cass trying to convince him that he has, rights and responsibilities and he can do what he wants. And that he wants a name, which is kind of interesting, which we'll talk about. That the choice of camera placement and movement was interesting. The direction of that scene was interesting because it was a little more dynamic than we usually see in Star Trek. It was a very, very slow moving camera that was outside of the office that slowly moved in and went through the door and then kind of went around them. And then, of course, it turned into a 2-shot situation. But I noticed that because it was just a little bit more visually dynamic than 90s Star Trek usually is.
Okay. I didn't notice that at all, but that's because you're the film guy.
That's right. So what did you make about the Doctor and Kessa's conversation?
Well, I mean, both of their conversations, because we didn't really talk as much about their relationship. Yes, she certainly believes that he is, a person, and she is trying to convince him that he is more than he is.
Yeah. Well, I don't think she's trying to convince him that he is more than he is.
Well, not convince, but get him to realize and get him to own that in a way.
Well, I think it's more that she's trying to convince him that he is more than he thinks he is.
I guess that's a better way of phrasing it.
I know, that's why I said it.
I guess side note for a minute, is Kess a little too good to be true? She is a tiny bit of Mary Sue magical girlfriend, isn't she?
Yeah.
She can make a garden. She can become a doctor. She has a photographic memory. She has she has maybe psychic powers. Like
her hair smells like fresh baked bread. I don't know.
Why
making that up, but
to ask it gently, why is she with Neelix? But I guess the other question is, please God, tell me that the Kess and the Doctor are not a thing.
No.
Okay. Because, I mean, there was that moment where she kisses him on the cheek, and I was just hoping that's a nice friendship kiss.
Yeah, no, they don't.
Okay.
No, they never fuck or date
God.
or anything like that, no. I mean, the Kess and Neelix thing is very strange, and I have problems with it, especially with the way Neelix is portrayed later, but we'll get to that later. Yeah, I don't know why she's with Neelix, and
I'm starting to lose my goodwill for him, I will say.
Oh, I don't know. I like him. I mean, this episode where he said, "What? What did he say? A mind what?" I don't know. I just like that. He's the guy who doesn't know anything about Star Trek.
So
he's always like, "What the fuck are you guys doing? What are you doing?"
Oh my God, Neelix is a Star Wars fan stuck in a Star Trek show.
He kind of is like a Star Wars character. A little bit.
Okay, now I think I appreciate him again.
Yeah. I mean, he's not my favorite character, but he is fine, and they use him appropriately.
Okay.
I mean, he never becomes the first officer or something crazy like that. They don't give him a uniform.
But is there an episode where he has to command the ship for one episode, and it's terrifying? Because that's what I would have pitched.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I would have pitched that episode.
I mean, it's possible, but I don't think so. Cass, you're right. I think Cass is a little bit of a problematic character. She is a little too good to be true. I don't know that it's really shown that she has any faults whatsoever.
Yeah, I guess that's mostly she's compassionate. She's willing to speak her mind. She just every positive quality that you can. And
she also doesn't really seem to have any sort of interests of her own.
Yeah, people.
I mean, yeah, she wants to be a doctor, but I don't know. I mean, you're right. She is a little bit of a
Mary Sue.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
Little bit.
It's not terrible, and I like her because, again, there's no way to not like her.
No, she's great, and I think Jennifer Lean is a fine actress. It's sad what happened to her later on, but...
What happened to her?
I'll tell you off mic.
Oh, God.
It's too depressing for this podcast.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think this is a fine episode. Is there a lot of profound statements here about the human condition or Star Trek in general? No, not really. It's just an episode that tells us a little bit more about Tom Paris and Tuvok, and I think it does a good job with that.
I mean, I see echoes of the Kirk, Spock, McCoy in Paris, Tuvok, and Harry Kim. I see kind of the very beginnings of that kind of a friendship. Paris is kind of the failed Kirk, and Tuvok is the Vulcan, and Harry Kim is as innocent and guileless as McCoy can be. And I don't know. You're giving me a look, but so I guess my hope that the two of them turn out to be the young version of that doesn't come true.
They actually get into a throuple.
Aww.
So
it was very progressive for its time.
It was, yeah. I mean, Tuvok is alone, and his wife is in the Alpha Quadrant.
Yeah.
It's only logical to be bisexual, so... that's what happens.
Well, if he's having sex with a human, it's equally weird to have sex with somebody of your preferred gender as it is to have sex with an alien of your non-preferred gender. So, it's if you're open to one, you might as well be open to the other.
Why not? Well, and gender is also not a binary thing, so let's leave that alone. I guess finally, the one thing that I would want to mention or talk about is why... Okay, so Chakotay and B'Elanna, I mean, B'Elanna's on the bridge because she needs to be there for the scene to work, otherwise it doesn't work. The Maquis thing hasn't really been brought up in a few episodes.
Yeah.
They bring it up very briefly in this episode only because they're being attacked by the Numiri and they need to have... this Maquis thing happen.
Yeah. I kind of liked that exchange because, number one, she does trust Chakotay to take the helm when he says, "Oh, I've got a great Maquis trick." And I think
and the great Maquis trick is killing all of you Starfleet scum. Launch all the torpedoes at Voyager.
Yeah, exactly. That she trusts him not to do that. I think the punchline of that scene is that the brilliant Maquis trick, though, turns out to be this, and this is one of those moments where she is trying to contain her just hilarity at the situation. The Maquis trick turns out to be, we're going to pretend to be disabled and then we'll fire, and, they're not going to see it coming. I mean, there is that, he does have that point, which, well, this is the Delta Quadrant. Every old trick is new again. They haven't seen all of this, which I think could be certainly another theme for the series. But, the fact that she's teasing him, I think, about it. I think it's still, but it does work, certainly. It does turn out to be the trick that works. It is the usual, this is a theme that was handled a lot more sophisticatedly in DS9, but what wasn't, that the Federation has all of this amazing technology and that it has phaser rifles that have 12 different settings and that, we have the best minds. And the Maquis was a bunch of terrorists who were using scrappy techniques and, some situations, the scrappy techniques are going to work. They're not going to be as refined as Federation techniques, but at the end of the day, they got the job done.
Yeah.
I think that's what I got. I mean,
there's a reason why the United States lost the war in Vietnam.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's just kind of
Well, there's the
Maquis are kind of janky, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I guess. Okay. Well, if you have any thoughts on either of the episodes of Voyager we just talked about, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast at trekabout.show.com. You can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/trekabout. If you give us $5 a month or more, you will get our special patron episodes once a month. The one that we released for April was on Galaxy Quest.
The best Star Trek film ever made.
That is the only way you will ever be able to hear our thoughts on Galaxy Quest is if you pay us. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Social media, we're on it. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Trekabout Show is our username in all those places. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review for Trekabout. If you are enjoying the show, next week we are going to be talking about the Star Trek Voyager episodes Emanations and Prime Factors, which has nothing to do with the Prime Directive.
Oh.
Or maybe it does. I don't remember.